In this video, we're going to complete the KutaSoftware Infinite PreAlgebra free worksheet, two-step equations with decimals. Now, this is very similar to the two-step equations with integers or the two-step equations with fractions worksheet, except now we're just working with decimals. So let's dive into number 1, where our instructions are to solve each equation. Now, when we're solving for an equation, we're solving for the unknown within that equation, which happens to be our variable m in number 1. In order to solve for m, we need to isolate it or get it all by itself. So what's my first step in order to get m by itself? Well, I need to move this negative 4.9 or this minus 4.9 and this 2.8 to the other side of my equation. What order should I move those in? Well, if I tried multiplying by 2.8 first, in order to get it out of the denominator, I'm multiplying both my left and right side, but notice when I multiply that left side, it gets multiplied to this first term and the second term, because that multiplication is distributed throughout. So we don't want to start with that. Instead, we'll start with moving this 4.9 to the other side by adding it. So if we add a 4.9 to each side, negative 4.9 plus 4.9, that equals 0. So on our left-hand side, we'll have m divided by 2.8 equals negative 7.11 plus 4.9. We can do this in our heads, or since I already have a calculator pulled up, let's just use a calculator to make going through this worksheet a little bit easier. So we're going to have negative 7.11 plus 4.9, and that's going to be a negative 2.21. So negative 2.21. Now it's time to multiply. If we multiply both sides by that 2.8, you'll see that this 2.8 divided by 2.8 equals 1, and 1 times m is m. So now we've isolated m, and m is equal to negative 2.21 times 2.8. So we'll go ahead and type in negative 2.21 times 2.8, and that's going to give us a negative 6.188. So negative 6.188 is our solution in number 1. Negative 6 and 188 thousandths. Let's move on to number 2. Number 2 is similar to number 1 in the fact that we have 2 terms on our left-hand side and 1 term on our right-hand side. On our left-hand side, we have 0.4 times x plus 3.9 equals, on our right-hand side, a 5.78. In order to solve, we need to isolate that x. And because it's multiplied by 0.4, I'm going to need to eventually divide by 0.4 to get the x by itself, but I'm going to actually start with this other term that's not multiplied by our variable. It's just added. So I'm going to subtract a 3.9 from both sides. When I do so, we'll get 0.4 times x plus 0, which is 0.4 times x, and that's going to be equal to 5.78 minus 3.9. Well, since we already have these decimals lined up, let's go ahead and just subtract. 8 minus 0 is 8. 7 minus 9, we can't do that, so let's borrow. This will become a 4. That 7 goes to 17. 17 minus 9, it's going to be another 8. Keep that decimal in line. 4 minus 3 is 1. So we have 0.4x equals 1.88. What's my last step? Just to divide by that 0.4, because when I do so, 0.4, 4/10, divided by 4/10 equals 1, and 1 times x equals x. So we'll have x equals 1.88 divided by 0.4, which if we do this division out, longhand, 4 doesn't go into 1, but it goes into 18, and that's 4 times, so that would be 16. Subtract that, that's 2. Bring down the 8, 4 goes into 28, 7 times. And don't forget our decimal. So x is equal to 4.7 for number 2. Let's move on to number 3. Number 3 is a bit different from 1 and 2 because notice now our variable is encompassed or a part of this entire fraction. So we're not going to be able to add or subtract the 10.5 at the start since that's involved in the fraction as well. So we're going to start by getting rid of that denominator by multiplying by an 11.57 to both sides. And when we do so, 11.57 times our numerator divided by 11.57, that 11.57 divided by itself equals 1. So we have 1 times negative 10.5 plus m, which if we were to distribute that 1 through, it would just be negative 10.5 plus m. And that's going to be equal to negative 2.748 times 11.57, which I'm just going to work out on my calculator to save us some time. Negative times a positive, we know we're going to be a negative. And when we multiply negative 2.748 by 11.57, we get negative 31.79436. So negative 31.79436. Now what I'm going to do, remember we're solving, so we're isolating that variable m. In order to do that, since I have a negative 10.5 plus m, I need to add a 10.5 to both sides. Because when I add the opposite of a negative, or if I add the opposite of a positive to itself, that's going to be 0. And adding both to each sides, we're going to get m equal to, if we were to just add 10, we'd be at negative 21.79436. But we're not just adding 10, we're adding 10.5. So adding a positive 5 to that negative 7 is going to result in 2. So we're going to have negative 21.29436. And feel free to double check this answer with a calculator. Let's move on to number 4. For number 4, we have 9.2 times our variable r, which is what we're going to isolate, plus 5.514 equals 158.234. What's our first step? Well, 9.2 is multiplied by r, and then we're adding this next term. Let's get rid of that term. So let's subtract 5.514 from both sides. And when we do so, on our left-hand side, we'll just have a 9.2 times r plus 0, which is 9.2r, and that's going to be equal to, doing out this subtraction, 4 minus 4 is 0, 3 minus 1 is 2, 2 minus 5, can't do that, have to borrow. So 12 minus 5 is 7, keep that decimal in line, 7 minus 5 is 2, and then we have that 15. So 152.720. Last step, in order to isolate the r, we're dividing by 9.2. So we're going to get that r is equal to, and I'm just going to do this one right on my calculator, 152.72 divided by 9.2, that's going to give us 16.6. So 16.6 is equal to r for number 4. And what that means is, if I take 16.6 and plug that in, 9.2 times 16.6, then plus a 5.514 is going to equal that 158.234. That's what solving for an equation is all about. Let's move on to number 5. And number 5, v is divided by 10.44, then we're subtracting 2.9, and that's equal to negative 4.422. What's our first step? Well, we don't want to multiply by 10.44 at the start, because then that gets distributed to both of our terms on the left-hand side. Instead, we'll simply add 2.9 to both sides. And when we do that, negative 2.9 plus 2.9 equals 0. So we're going to have v divided by 10.44 equals, well, negative 4.422 plus 2.9. So doing this out on our calculator, adding those together, we're going to get negative 1.522. Now, last step, in order to isolate v, just multiply by 10.44, and we're going to do so on both sides of our equation, because whatever we do to the left-hand side, we do to the right-hand side. Why is that? Because it's an equality. We're saying that this side is equal to this side. So whenever we do something to one side, we have to do it to the other, performing those same exact operations. So we're going to have that v is equal to, let's go back to our calculator, negative times positive is going to be a negative. So taking our negative 1.522 and multiplying it by 10 and 4400ths, we're going to get negative 15.88968. Let's move on to number 6. For number 6, we have a negative 5.4 minus 7.8x equals negative 78.408. The x is multiplied by a 7.8 and then subtracted from that negative 5.4. Think about if we were doing the order of operations, multiplication would come before addition or subtraction. So when we're solving, we're going to think of doing the reverse of that. So as opposed to worrying about our multiplication first, we're going to worry about our addition or subtraction first. So I'm going to add a 5.4 to both sides. Doing so, I'll get a negative 7.8 times x on my left-hand side equal to negative 78.408 plus a 5.4 is going to be negative 73.008. And we can do this one on our head. Now, our last step, just divide by that negative 7.8 in order to isolate x. So x is going to be equal to, let's move to our calculators for this one, a negative divided by a negative is going to be a positive, and that positive number that we're going to get is going to be 9.36. So 9 36 is our solution for number 6. Moving right along to number 7, our variable, our unknown, is in the numerator of some fraction. So we can envision this as parentheses in that numerator. So doing the reverse of order of operations, PIMDOS, parentheses is first, so we're going to deal with that last in the case of solving. So I'm going to start by multiplying by a 5.2 to both sides of my equation. So I'll have k minus 2.6 equals a negative 0.418 multiplied by 5.2. So we have k minus 2.6 equals negative 0.418 times 5.2. Move into my calculator for that. I know it's going to be a negative, since a negative times a positive is a negative, and that's going to be negative 2.1736. Now my last step, in order to isolate the k, I'm going to add, since I'm subtracting, 2.6. So I'll have k equal to, doing this quickly on my calculator, negative 2.1736 plus 2.6 is going to be a 0.4264. And that's my solution for number 7. Let's move on to number 8, the last equation on this first page. What do you think our first step is in number 8? Since our variable is multiplied by some constant and then added to some other constant, we're going to start by getting rid of the constant that it's added to. So I'm going to subtract a 10.71 from both sides of our equation. Doing so, I'll have a negative 8.38 times v equal to, let's go ahead and do the subtraction out quickly. 2 minus 0 is 2, 8 minus 1 is 7. Can't do that 3 minus 7, so I'll borrow to make it a 13 minus 7, which is 6. Keep that decimal in line. 0 minus 0 is 0, 3 minus 1 is 2, and 1 minus 0 is 1. So we get that negative 8.38 times v equals 120.672. Next, Remember, we're isolating this v, so we're just going to divide by what it's multiplied by. Dividing by that negative 8.38, because when we divide both sides by that negative 8.38, my left-hand side, that negative term divided by itself goes to 1, and 1 times v equals v. That's that identity property there. And then let's go to our calculator for that right-hand side. We have a positive divided by a negative. We know that's going to result in a negative, and that's going to be a negative 14.4. Let's continue on to that next page. However, before you do so, if you're finding this video helpful, go ahead and click that thumbs up button. Let's keep moving on though. In number 9, our unknown is in the numerator of some fraction. So we can envision those parentheses. Therefore, we're going to start with getting rid of the denominator, so multiplying both sides by 3.1. When we do so, we're going to have 2.8 plus x on our left-hand side, and that's equal to 2.709 times 3.1, which on our calculator, a positive times a positive is going to be a positive, and that positive is going to be 8.3979. So now what we're going to do is simply subtract 2.8 from both sides. When we do so, 2.8 minus 2.8 goes to 0. 0 plus x equals x. And x is going to be equal to, doing this next step on our papers, 9 minus 0 is 9, 7 minus 0 is 7, 9 minus 0 is 9, 3 minus 8, can't do that, so I'll cancel out and borrow. 13 minus 8 is 5, keep that decimal in line, 7 minus 2 is 5. So for this problem, we get 5.5979 for our solution. Number 10, same concept. Think about those parentheses in our numerator. So we're going to start by getting rid of our denominator of 6.1. And we do that by multiplying both sides. 6.1 divided by 6.1 is 1, and 1 times n minus 12.9 is just n minus 12.9. And then doing the multiplication out on our calculator, since we already have it pulled up, negative 0.377 times 6.1 is going to equal negative 2.2997. Now our last step is just to add 12.9 to both sides. So n is going to be equal to, if we want to just continue this on our calculator, we're going to then add 12.9 to get 10.6003. And that's our solution for number 10. For number 11, again, we're going to start by multiplying out that denominator. So multiplying by 9.2 to both sides. So we're going to get just our numerator as negative 7.3 plus r equal to, let's do this on the calculator, negative 0.739 times 9.2. That's negative 6.7988. Our last step, remember, we're isolating that r, solving this equation, so we're going to add a positive 7.3 to both sides. So we'll get that r is equal to negative 6.7988 plus 7.3, which is 0.5012. That's our solution for number 11. For number 12, again, we're going to start out by multiplying, and what we're going to multiply by this time is 11.796. That's going to leave us with negative 13.3 plus k, and doing that on our calculator, a negative times a positive is going to be a negative, and that's going to be a negative 3.491616. Now our last step, we're just going to add a 13.3 to both sides, because when we add 13.3 to that left-hand side, we'll get 0 plus k, which is k, and that's equal to taking our negative 3.491616 plus 13.3, which is 9.808384. Again, that's 9.808384. Moving on to number 13, we start by, well, here we have it again. Our numerator is where our variable is contained, so we're going to start by multiplying by our denominator on both sides. And that's in order to get that divided by itself equal to 1, and 1 times the numerator will just be our numerator of 12.1 plus a. And that's equal to, doing this out on our calculator, 7.071 times 4.9, 34.6479. Now, in order to isolate our variable a, it's added to a 12.1, so we're going to subtract a 12.1 from both sides. So we'll get a on our left-hand side equal to, let's go ahead and do this out quickly. We'll have 9, 7, 4, 6 minus 1 is 5. Keep that decimal in line. 4 minus 2 is 2. 3 minus 1 is 2. So this is 22.5479. Number 14, we're switching it up again. Our variable is in the numerator, but it's in the numerator of a fraction that's all by itself, and then added to another term. So we're going to start by getting rid of that term that our variable is added with by adding 13.9 to both sides. Doing so, we'll just have our variable in our fraction, which is b over 12.8, and that's going to be equal to a negative 13.306 plus 13.9, which is 0.594. Now our last step on this one is isolating that b. We got to multiply by what it's divided by. So multiplying by a 12.8. When we multiply by that, you'll see this 12.8 divided by 12.8 equals 1, and 1 times b is b. So b is going to equal our 0.594 multiplied by 12.8, which gives us 7.6032. Number 15, our variable is back in a numerator, but it's added with the term before the division. So remembering those parentheses around our numerator, we're going to start by multiplying by the value of the denominator, which is 2.89. So we're going to get 12.84 plus x equals, working this out on our calculator, that right-hand side, negative 2.166 times 2.89 is a negative 6.25974. Last and final step for this problem, since our x, our unknown, is added to 12.84, in order to isolate it, we need to subtract a 12.84. So we're going to get x equal to, think about when we have a negative and we're subtracting a negative, we're going further into the negatives. So think about adding these two negatives together. We're going to get a larger negative number. So we'll get, let's fill our placeholder zeros. 4, 7 plus 0 is 7, 9 plus 0 is 9, 5 plus 4 is 9, 2 plus 8 is 10, so put our 0, keep that decimal in line, carry the 1, and remember all these numbers are negative. So then 1 plus 6 is 7, 7 plus 12 is 19. So this is a negative 19.09974. For this problem, when we go to isolate v, it's multiplied by 12.3 and then add it to 3.649. So we're going to start by subtracting 3.649 from both sides. When we do so, we'll get 12.3 times v equal to, doing the subtraction out, 9 minus 9 is 0. 2 minus 4, can't do that, so we'll borrow from the 3. 12 minus 4 is 8. 2 minus 6, can't do that, so we'll borrow from the 6. 12 minus 6 is 6. Keep that decimal in line. 5 minus 3 is 2, and then we have that 14. Last and final step, in order to isolate the v, we're going to divide by 12.3. So let's go ahead and move to our calculators for that. We're going to get that v is equal to 142.680 divided by 12.3, which is 11.6. That's our solution for number 16, meaning that if we were to plug 11.6 in for v, when we do out this problem, this left-hand side is indeed going to equal 146.329. Moving on to our second to last problem, number 17. In order to isolate that p, we got to get rid of that negative 3.8. And we'll do that by adding 3.8 to both sides. So we'll get negative 13.4 times p equal to, let's go ahead and just work this out on our calculators, negative 460.606 plus 3.8 gives us a negative 456.806. So from here, all I need to do is divide by what p is multiplied by, which is that negative 13.4. And when I do so on both sides of my equation, negative 13.4 divided by negative 13.4 is a positive 1. So I'll get 1 times p, which is equal to p. And then that's equal to my right-hand side, which, moving back to our calculator, negative 456.806 divided by a negative 13.4 is going to be a positive 34.09. Finally, the last problem on this worksheet, number 18. We have r minus 8.7 divided by 3.6 equals 3.722. Because this subtraction is all involved in the numerator, we need to think of this as having parentheses. So in order to start, we can't just add an 8.7 to both sides because that 8.7 is also divided by 3.6. We need to multiply 3.6 to both sides at the start. Another way to visualize this is let's split this fraction up. We'll have r over 3.6 minus 8.7 over 3.6 equals 3.722. Because 3.7 is in the denominator of each r and an 8.7. So then if you were to visualize multiplying this by 3.6, we distribute that 3.6 into both terms and it cancels out with both terms in the denominator to leave us with just our original numerator. What's another way we could solve this? Well, since we split this fraction up, we have a constant, and that's either added or subtracted, with our variable divided by some other number. So we can actually just calculate this 8.7 divided by 3.6 and add it to both sides at the start, since it's not within our fraction anymore, since we broke it up. So sometimes there's more than one way to solve a problem, but let's just do the easiest way and multiply by that 3.6 at the start. So 3.6 divided by 3.6 is 1, and 1 times r minus 8.7 is r minus 8.7. And that's equal to, let's go to our calculators and do 3.722 times 3.6, which gives us 13.3992. 2. Now our last step is just to add that 8.7 to both sides. Since it was subtracted from the r, that negative 8.7 plus 8.7 results in 0, and r plus or minus 0 is r. So we're going to get that r is equal to, let's do this addition out long ways. Filling in my zeros as placeholders, we'll have a 2 followed by a 9. 9, 3 plus 7 is 10, so writing my 0, carrying my 1, keeping that decimal in line. 1 plus 3 plus 8 is going to be 12, so that's going to be 2. Carry my 1, 1 plus 1 is 2. So 22.0992 is my final solution for this worksheet. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.